And welcome back into another edition of A Closer Look. I'm your host, Dwayne Nelson. And with me in the studio today is State Representative Timothy Hill. Glad to see you and glad to have you on the show this morning.
It's good to be here. Thanks so much.
Talk about how long have you been in Nashville and how long have you been representing the fine folks of your district in Tennessee?
Well, I serve the 3rd House District, which is portions of Sullivan, Olive Johnson, and portions of Carter County. It's hard to believe, but I'll be finishing out my 3rd term, so starting year number 6 here shortly.
That's a lot of stuff.
It's gone by fast.
I am sure. And it seems like 3 months from now, or just a few months from now, you're going to be back in the legislative session again. And it comes around quite often, probably sometimes too often.
It does. So typically we're in session January through about April or May, and we're in session Monday through Thursday. And it is an absolute whirlwind, and that's the way we like it. We want to be efficient. We want to be spend tax dollars wisely. Don't be in session a day longer than you have to be, but be there long enough to do the people's business, then come on home.
Now, you supported Tennessee's educators and students during 2017, that legislative session, and talk a little bit about that.
Well, we found a way without raising taxes, and this is going to be a common theme as we're talking about the last legislative session. In fact, from a fiscal perspective, this past budget, the one that we just passed, and then the previous, we borrowed, guess how much? We borrowed $0.
Wow.
And that's unheard of in state government. And now Tennessee is different than most states, and we're certainly different than the federal government, because when we borrow money, we do this wild thing and we pay it back. The last 2 budget cycles, we borrowed $0. That's a huge issue. But what we have done is we found ways to support education, support teachers, which is a good thing, without raising any type of tax dollars. And in fact, we've gone the other way, and we found a few taxes that we've been able to eliminate and cut over the past few years: the inheritance tax, the gift tax. We actually are in the process of phasing out the hall income tax, which is a little known fact that Tennessee, years ago, we went through a struggle to make sure we didn't have a state income tax, which I believe was absolutely the right thing to do. But we still had the hall income tax. And the hall income tax is on dividends, and we're in the process of finally phasing that out. And of course, when you do things like that, which I certainly voted for it, it's a good thing. When you do things like that, you have to be very careful, because there was a local component to that as well. And so that's part of the reason for the phase out, is to give locals the ability to kind of catch up and make their decisions as they need to.
Well, budgets are tough any way you look at it. But Tennessee, as far as the health situation, do we feel pretty confident where we're at right now, even though the federal government's kind of all everywhere right now?
Well, when you start talking about health care, and I serve on the Insurance and Banking Committee, and also the Insurance and Banking Subcommittee, and we deal with I felt like more health care issues on the Insurance Committee than when I served on the Health Committee my first term.
Wow.
And on the Health Committee, you deal a lot with scope of practice, and this field is interested in maybe doing a new piece or part. But on the Insurance Committee, it's everything from TennCare to the commercial insurance folks. And so when you start talking about Medicaid expansion, which again was a fight a few years ago, there's no one, myself included, that wants to see, because of the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, we'll call it the Unaffordable Care Act.
Right.
But because of that federal legislation, no one wants to see folks being in the middle, be uninsured. So you've got folks that are working and don't qualify for TennCare, but they're not able to go into the exchange. Nobody wants to see that. However, the plan that was presented a few years ago was not palatable to the legislature. It failed in the Senate, and so here we are. So from a healthcare perspective, we have a lot of moving parts. You've got the federal government. President Trump has said that he intends to talk about block granting for Medicaid. And when he does that, or when they choose to do that, if they choose to do that, assuming they can get something passed,
right,
which could be assuming a lot right now. But when that happens, we get to drive the bus. The problem is, as I was sitting with the governor and we were having a discussion around his conference room table about this very thing a few months ago, the problem is that you can drive your own bus off the cliff.
Right.
And so we have to be very careful. I believe that block granting is the way to do it. I think that if we can find a way to spend it at the local level as opposed to even in Nashville, those dollars are going to be spent in a better, more efficient, a wise fashion. But they certainly can be spent in Nashville better than they can in D.C. because of the nature of the bureaucracy in Washington. So we've got the possibility of the block grant side. Another huge thing that's happening for our region is the advent, if you will, of Ballad Health. Mm-hmm. You know, this is a huge step. It's a huge move, and when you undertake something like that, part of what the Tennessee side, and we'll see what Virginia is going to do, but part of what the Tennessee side has said, you can do it, but you've got to start working on these particular health outcomes for your region. You know, we have all the accentuated issues, if you will, mm-hmm. and that's part of the thing with Ballad Health is, you know, okay, you can have it, but you've got to work on these few things to try to help your population be healthier. Well, that's good. That's a good thing. Mm-hmm. But we'll just have to see how all that's going to play out.
Well, let me ask you this, because some folks are worried about the fact of, okay, you've got a health care conglomerate within the Tri-Cities area, so maybe the first 2 years everything will go pretty smooth, but will we see an increase in our health care costs and treatment of the same because of the fact that they know basically you have them and them only to deal with?
I think that is a genuine concern. I think that's a genuine concern. Anytime you decrease competition, this is just a rule of markets, but anytime that you decrease competition, you're going to, that's a possibility. What you have to try to count on in this scenario is that, yes, they'll be the only large healthcare system. They've got their work cut out for them because they have to figure out who they're going to be, just as much as you know, what does their administration team look like, which hospital is going to do which piece and part. But you also have to remember too that healthcare, when you involve the federal government, you know, and even state government to some degree, but when you involve the government side of things, you know, from on high comes this mandate, you know, whether it's the ACA, whether it's you have to have this certain mix of commercial payers versus TennCare to stay alive, whatever. Whenever you do that, all of a sudden there's this ever-changing, shifting sands of healthcare underneath the providers. That's part of the reasons what has brought about the discussion and Ballad Health as a whole, is because healthcare is not changing every 5 years or every 3 years. It's changing every 18 months, every 12 months, and I get asked quite a bit, you know, hey, you know, just could you slow it down a little bit? Let us adjust to our market, their version of market conditions, and go from there. But you know, that's the difficulties that healthcare is facing. You know, so I think from the Medicaid expansion side, the block granting is certainly the way to go. But then all of a sudden, you know, we have to have a discussion that's even deeper of MCOs, the managed care organizations, and what is their role with TennCare, and that's very policy heavy, and we'll just have to see how that goes.
So, in essence, by having this merger between the two hospital organizations, Wellmont Health System and Mountain States Health Alliance, being formed as Ballad, that could give us a leg up as far as the futuristic part of this thing goes with healthcare.
It could, and it also it could be a test case. Now, I never want the healthcare of the region that I live in to be the test case for anybody. That's not really how you want to look at it. I don't think that the Commissioner of Health would have said, okay, guys, go ahead and do this under specific requirements unless they felt that it was in the best interest of people. There's a genuine concern about the economy. I mean, that has to go along with it, just because, you know, common sense tells you that you don't need two of this job in administration when now you've only got one entity. Right. So we'll just have to see how it goes. I don't have a crystal ball on that one.
No. But there will be stipulations that will be imposed
Correct.
on them in which they'll have to follow.
Correct. And I think a huge issue from the federal side of things when you're starting to talk about health care, and I've heard this over and over again, is the Medicare reimbursement rates. And being able to recruit the best doctors and the best providers here, and that their challenges are huge. Their challenges are great, and that would be for the two entities that are becoming ballot or ballot alone, or independent providers, independent physicians. They will be the largest healthcare provider in the region, but they're not going to be the only healthcare provider in the region. It's just they're going to be the very large entity that's going to be here.
And unemployment in the state, 3.4% in August, the lowest in recorded history. And we have about a minute we can talk about that, and we'll come back and talk about it in the next segment.
Sure. It just speaks to, it speaks to the conservative leadership, conservative fiscal leadership through decades and decades in the state of Tennessee. You don't get to that percentage of unemployment because you just get there overnight. It's a long standing strategy of trying to take care of business. And so in that regard, we're in great shape in the state. I just want to see that percentage here in Northeast Tennessee.
Right, and you want to see that kind of be blanketed throughout
That's
our
right.
area, absolutely.
That's right.
We're talking with State Representative Timothy Hill, and we'll be back with more on A Closer Look.